Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are now going into the second to last Fireside chat. This is Pathways to Addiction and the Role of New Treatments. What I firstly like to do is to get the two panelists to introduce themselves. What I think is a very unique take on this topic, very different to any other one I've ever been to. So, Paul, why don't you start?
Yeah, very unique. I think I'm probably the only treatment provider here. So my name's Paul Dent. I'm a trauma and addiction therapist. I'm from Moody. Moody has been going 50 years. We provide treatment to the most severe people suffering from gambling harm. So our role is to treat people. And I will emphasize that throughout what I say today. We treat people who suffer from gambling harm and severe gambling harm. And that is our role throughout. We treat people who suffer not only from gambling, but suffer from complex issues, that drug, alcohol, mental health, and trauma. So gambling is seen as a symptom. We are here to support people who, through the issues in their life, turn to comorbidity and addiction to deal with issues in their life. And we see gambling as a symptom of that, and we deal with complex issues. And that's our role.
Pedro.
My name is Pedro. Sorry about the voice. Haven't been partying too hard. My background is a bit mixed. I'm a trained psychologist and therapist. I lived in Brighton for 12 years. Paul and I, we work at gambling therapy together at the Moody Association. I also have worked for multiple operators. You name them, your William Hills, 888, Bally's, GIGs, and I'm a therapist in private practice. I do a lot of safer gambling consultancy with operators, and now my middle life crisis have been to decide to do a PhD, but not a PhD on anything. When I went to the Center of Excellence in Safer Gambling at Gibraltar University, I approached the chair and said, Jolt, I want to do a PhD. Yeah, we can do with someone with your skill set. I said, I want to do a PhD in Psychedelic Assisted Therapy for gambling disorder. And he was like, okay, are you sure that you don't want to do something a bit easier? But I was a bit like, I want to do this because it's difficult, not because it's easy. So, thank you for, being here. Probably you are the most rock and roll people in the whole event right now.
I'd just like to say it's really good to be able to share the stage with Pedro. Pedro actually got my job at Moody, persuaded them that actually I could be of use to them, and persuaded the CEO. He promptly left and left me 6 years ago. And with Moody, I wouldn't still be there if it hadn't been for Pedro. And this is the first time I think we've shared a stage, actually.
Yeah, it's my fault that he's... Yeah.
It's definitely your fault.
It was a very acrimonious departure. So I think one of the most interesting things is, and most misunderstood terms is addiction. What is addiction, Paul?
So, in my view, as a trauma addiction therapist, addiction is a maladaptive coping mechanism. So, perhaps some of you have read Gabor Mate, it is a way of dealing with life's issues. It is, in many ways, to deal with trauma, early life trauma. So people will deal with stress, deal with early life trauma. They will try and deal with the emotional pain, emotional stress. They will turn to something that deals with that pain. They want to move it away, in simple terms. They want to cover it up. And they will turn to something that actually, in the initial sense, doesn't seem a problem. But in it, that then becomes the problem. So drink, alcohol may in itself not be an issue, but it becomes, as we say, a maladaptive coping mechanism. So the addiction itself then becomes the issue. And gambling often may be seen as a way of financing that. So gambling actually may be an escape from the maladaptive coping mechanism, which in itself may be a way of dealing with early life trauma. Now, early life trauma may be abuse, it may be neglect, it may in itself just be lack of care. Many people will go through trauma. Not everybody will go through and become an addict, but many people who are addicts will have gone through trauma. People quote Gabor Mate, and they've read his book, Hungry Ghosts. I would suggest a better book to read would be What Happened to You by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. And there's another book he wrote, actually, was My Life as a Dog, where there's cases about, such as the Wacker siege, about how children have gone through abuse and gone through trauma. They're much more insightful into what it is actually to experience trauma and then deal with that through addiction. I've actually put a paper out on my LinkedIn, which is being linked very kindly through Casino Guru. Thank you, Shimal. It's complex. And we deal with, at Gordon Moody, we deal with complexity. There is not a simple answer.
So the trauma which you mentioned there, if you've had trauma, then therefore you have the risk to become an addict.
Yeah.
Does it just manifest itself in any form of addiction? Shopping, chocolate, gambling, drink, drugs?
As humans, we choose many different ways to... We don't like pain. We don't like feeling uncomfortable. Therefore, we will choose various different ways to remove that pain. And in itself, you know, we eat chocolate, we go online, sex, gambling. These are ways of nullifying those experiences. Pedro, perhaps you'd like to contribute.
I mean, in my experience, as a therapist, sometimes you get people that they come to you and, say, oh, I have an addictive personality. First, I was in AA, then, I was in, this other recovery group. Now I'm addicted to gambling, and the reality, when you start working with the client is, look, there's not such a thing as an addictive personality. That's not true. What it happens normally is that the person has an unresolved conflict, and the way that the person have dealt in the past with the emotional discomfort is through an addiction. What happened, they may have overcome an addiction, but at some level they know when, those distressful feelings, they come back, they just do another thing, in a way that is not helpful, in a way that is not healthy. And, we talk a lot about, substance use disorders or any type of behavioral disorders, but, I'm sure that many of you, you're a bit of workaholics, you work in the gambling industry, really long hours, being available 24/7, there's always a drama, you need to jump on the phone, and, a lot of people that they have worked in the gambling industry that still work, it's a bit of borderline sometimes. It can be very unhelpful and say, oh, why am I doing this to myself? It's having a negative impact on my family, on my friends, on my well-being, on my levels of stress, so, yeah.
And there's two ways of looking at it. One would be self-medication to nullify the pain. Another way of looking at it is escape. If you escape those pains, you take something to feel something different, feel highs. So the person is either nullifying the pain or taking something that will give them a different sensation, a high. There's a third wave which is called dissociation, where people go null. Gambling is an escape. People want to escape from their life, escape from the symptoms. And that's where they get hooked, the high. That first high from that win, they get hooked on that, and then the cycle, the addictive cycle begins. Not addictive personality, the addictive cycle. And that's at Gordon Moody, that's something that we try to get people to understand. We work on a trauma model. Stabilize, challenge, begin to get them to understand what is it that led them into gambling, and then reintegrate into life. We run residential programs. Our male program is 14 weeks long. They come into us. It takes people 12 years to come to us. They've gone through everything. They've lost all their resources. Their partners probably said, you go to Gordon Moody, or that will be it. We've got the only women's residential centre in the world. It was really interesting to hear the Life Score, the person from Life School reaching out there. It was fantastic. We open the first purpose-built women's program next week. We've worked in other buildings. We've been open now for a year and a half now, working with women's residential. Nearly 70% of them come to us with trauma, come to us with domestic abuse. We run a 5-week program. Our biggest problem is some of them don't want to go home. They don't want to go back into the circumstances that create the reasons why they gamble, why they want to escape. That's really difficult for us, to send them back into the circumstances that are creating the problem initially. So we have to try and work with a support program brings them in, and screening is really difficult. It's a real challenge. And then how do we support them afterwards? And we work with a number of the big operators that are really supportive of us in terms of, because we don't get supported for capital expenditure, we only get supported for treatment. And working with those women is really, and then really emotional. It's emotional on our staff. And vicarious trauma is then something that our staff experience because of what comes in the door. Sorry, I'm taking your...
Go ahead. I'll take about drugs.
No. And the work that Pedro and his investigation, we thoroughly believe in research. And I think what Pedro and the University of Gibraltar is fantastic. And this is groundbreaking research. And I really want Pedro to talk about.
So we're going to come back into what we've said, but I just want to give Pedro the ability to tell us, when someone says psychedelics, kind of says treating drugs with drugs. If you think, but how can psychedelics be used to treat addiction/trauma?
Okay, it's thank you for the question. It is an interesting.
Firstly, what is a psychedelic? That's the first step.
It's a bit of a complicated question, but I'm just going to simplify. There's two main types of psychedelic. The typical psychedelics, which is your LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline, which are quite safe. In terms of toxicity, they're very, very safe. And, they produce, different patterns, in the brain that allow you to see things in a different way, People are able to reinterpret problems, go back to the past, see, why the trauma came, being able, to break unhelpful patterns. They say, oh, why am I doing this? Well, maybe I was doing that in the past because I was a child, but I don't need to do it anymore. Then there's the atypical psychedelics, which are they have a different safety profile. They're still relatively safe in clinical conditions, but they have some level of risk. And those are, for example, like MDMA, that normally is very safe, but you need to have some monitoring. Ibogaine, that they can have a bit of cardiotoxicity, but again, in a controlled environment, there's normally no problems. And then ketamine, that you probably have heard a lot about it. There's a lot of ketamine clinics everywhere, and they have been really successful, particularly to treat treatment-resistant depression, and is extremely effective for suicidality. So people that they are suicidal, an injection of ketamine, they can get them from the risk zone for around 10 days, which is a really good way, to start, for example, therapy or other type of treatment. So since the 70s, when Nixon, declared the war on drugs, there have been a ban on research, And back then, at the time, there was a lot of research. Actually, Bill Wilson, who was the creator of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, he had an experience with psychedelics, and this is why he stopped, and he decided to create the 12 steps. So it is, really important, to use science, and to study these treatments, in a controlled environment to help people, because, the medication and the therapeutic treatment that we have at the moment, they are not massively effective. And one thing that we see is that what they're doing is dampening the symptoms rather than allowing the person to have an emotional breakthrough, and that's it. You don't need more medication. You just need a bit of, a few sessions of therapy, the psychedelic assisted therapy sessions, and then a bit of integration work, where people, they talk about, what they saw, these sort of dreams that they had during the psychedelic experience, and they are able, to integrate it on the daily life. So it's a bit of in a quick nutshell.
Perfect. And so, Paul, kind of taking it on from there, because I guess you know a bit about this, is how can it be used to treat gambling addiction? Or both of you.
Let me go that one, because the research into other comorbidities, because for example, when we treat in gambling addiction, as Paul was saying, around 96% of the people that have gambling addiction, they have between 2 and +4 comorbidities. They normally have depression, anxiety, substance use disorder, and trauma. Psychedelics, particularly classic psychedelics, have been proven, like in research, and I'm not talking like in a lab in Mexico. I'm talking like, Johns Hopkins University, NYCU, Mount Sinai, is the top labs in the world, published in the, New England Journal of Medicine, in JAMA, like top journals. And you can see that, okay, they're really effective for depression. They're really effective for anxiety. They're really effective for, substance use disorder. They're really effective for, most of the things that we find in gambling disorder. Imagine me, working in this area for, more than a decade, and say, look, there's a lot of things that they're not working, but, there's treatments that they're used for other disorders. If we put them all together, it's pretty much what I see in a daily basis, when I was helping to treat people with gambling disorder. So it is, really exciting, because it's very likely to work. When I've been talking with top experts, David Nutt from Imperial College, Carl Harris, David Erizzo, I was asking, do you think that this will work? And they will say, look, if it works, they're the same pathways, they're the same type of problem, it is very likely to work. The only problem is, to fund the research, because, gambling have a lot of stigma, and trying to give, psychoactive substances to a gambler, you have a lot of people like, It's bad. What are you doing?
So, kind of, we discussed it when we were kind of talking about this topic last week. Is clearly, the industry would love to catch an addictive or a person who's going to become addicted to gambling before they know they're going to become addicted to gambling. Sadly, this, that's tends to be through analysis and data. So, how do you now what you guys are talking about and what your company does, Gordon Moody does, is gets people once they've actually identified themselves as addicted. So how can you get the industry to work with you to help the impression themselves and help addictive characters? How can they work with you?
I think AI is a huge step forward. I think the identification of people at risk is really, really important, and pulling out people. Those who suffer from trauma, I think it's very, very difficult because it's not gambling that is causing the issues. There are inherent mental health issues that are causing people to then gamble, and these are problematic. They are problematic to the industry. Go back to what I said at the beginning, we work with people. People have health issues, and therefore they are using gambling as a maladaptive coping mechanism. They will exist within the system. But the industry can do its best to support the majority of people who work gambling quite successfully. We are not anti-gambling. We're very supportive of the gambling industry, but we then work with, it's anywhere depending on which prevalent study you read, and the Gambling Commission put out a report last week almost apologising for the fact that there was 3 prevalent rates. I was like, how do you work with that? So AI can then work with the majority. There will be people that inevitably not slip through, but will continue to use gambling to almost self-medicate, as I say. And it is what we want to do is work with the industry so that they identify those people earlier and then move them to organisations such as ourselves. But also the reverse of that is also protecting their own staff. So vicarious trauma will happen to your staff. It happens to our staff. We are needing to build a skills academy to train our staff to deal with the complexity that we see come in the door. When people are coming in and they're coming in with medication, they're coming in with acute trauma, and we have to highly train our staff to deal with that. These people are out there and they will have trauma and they will be gambling. And that is very difficult to pick up on. And there will be issues for operators to then deal with that. So it's not us saying we are experts, we're just saying we're just slightly ahead of the curve. We just deal with the most difficult and know a little bit more and are wanting to help. And this is the same with the EDI. We had 100% increase in people who were Asian. That was 14. We had 4 people apply to us who were LGBTQII+. Now, I come from Brighton. Heteronormative is anything you want it to be. And everything else, it's not man, woman, and everything else is weird. We had 4 people. What do we do if someone applies to us who is transing from man to woman? Where do we put them? But we're talking about it. We're openly having discussion about this is difficult. And so we're saying, look, this is hard, but we're willing to put out our data, and I've put a Power BI out there today to show our data, and we're willing to share our data with the industry and show this is really hard, these are the people that we have through the door. And we will work with you to show what it's like to work with the most difficult people.
Pedro?
And work with you.
if I may, because I got clinical experience, but I also got industry experience. Is how do we, sort of identify people at risk, and how the industry can help, and there's different ways, that the industry can help. The first one, is train your staff. Why? Because you don't want for them to be, traumatized, have vicarious trauma, because when you're dealing day after day after day after day with people that may be suicidal, maybe in a really difficult situation, it's an emotional toll. Any one of you that work in the industry know that, half of the people that they're picking those calls, they're on their 20s, They don't have much life experience. They're not clinicians, so it's really important, to train them well. The other part is, supporting charities, like Gordon Moody, like BetBlocker, like, you name it. Work with any charity that you can, any association. Third one is technology. There's a lot of amazing technology providers that can help you to, early detection of customer, and then, have the skills to, just find out. An algorithm is not going to tell you the whole story, but, you can contact them and say, look, we have noticed that, this and that. Are you okay? In many occasions, you're going to see that the person needs to talk with someone, and then you can find, okay, do they have a problem? No. Can we refer them somewhere? And it's important to know about, who can help, because if you don't know, how are you going to, point them in the right direction?
And is the industry doing enough?
I'm really positive about the industry. I think the industry does a fantastic job, actually. We have tremendous relationships with all the large operators, and I think the industry does a fantastic job. There are people out there, and we know who they are, that will crucify. And I've sat in conferences where they've talked about manslaughter for CEOs. That is just not helpful. And the lived experience is a really important idea, and we're working to build a huge alumni of all our ex-residents, and I think that's an important way forward. But it needs to be realised that lived experience, people have to they need to get through a certain stage before they can start contribute about their journey. Their journey isn't the only journey, and it's not necessarily the right journey. And they need to be engaged with the industry, but not to pull it down, not to rip it to pieces. So the industry engaging with lived experience, I think, is an important way forward, but not as a crucifixion and a crusade.
Because one of the biggest challenges for the industry is the fact that it's easy to throw a headline out there with one individual who something went wrong, and then they quote very high percentage of addiction, which depending on who's saying it, they can, no one's going to test them. What are the rates of addiction? If you had to come up with this percentage.
Well, again, it goes back to prevalence. It's almost like prevalence rates, isn't it? Yeah, we deal with anywhere between 0.4 and 0.7% of the population, depending on which measure you go with.
And that is from any people who've got trauma, who become addicted, and they could manifest in gambling, drugs, whatever. Yeah. Just looking out at the audience, is there any questions out there? Well, there's a question there. Let me come and do this.
Thank you. Pedro, I have a question for you.
Okay.
In your practices, you treat addiction with psychedelics, which we know can also cause addiction.
Okay.
Can you please explain a little bit how does that process work, since we know that addiction is treated by these substances that can also cause addiction? You already said it's in monitored environment, but can you please just explain exactly what is the process like?
Thank you for asking this question, because it's, there's a common misconception. First of all, disclaimer, I do not provide psychedelic assisted therapy because it's illegal,
So go around the back.
It can only be provided in, clinical trials at the moment, or you will have to travel to a jurisdiction like Peru, Mexico, the Netherlands, where, is legal or is a bit like a gray market, like doing the comparison. In terms of psychedelics, it depends on the psychedelics. For example, like LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline, they are not addictive. There have been a lot of research, and the levels of potential addictive disorder is extremely low. Why? Because it's an experience really demanding. So imagine that you go through a psilocybin experience, and you face the abuser that abused you during your childhood. Look, you don't want to go there. You say, okay, that was good because I went through this experience. I understand that now I'm not a vulnerable child, and I'm going to work towards being a different person. Awesome. But if somebody tells you, oh, do you want to do more psilocybin next week? You say, no, thank you. It was a really meaningful experience, but I don't want to go there in a long time. There are other substances like ketamine that can be addictive, But when it's provided in a clinical setting, it is very rare. There's virtually no cases. And the same, for example, when you get an operation in a hospital, you're very likely to get diamorphine or ketamine. You don't come up from, after 3 days in the hospital like, oh, I really fancy some K or some heroin. No, you normally feel, okay, you feel a bit hangover and say, oh, I'm not feeling very well. So when, this is provided in a supportive environment, the likelihood to have a negative outcome in terms of addiction is very little. I don't know of any case, and they are thousands of clinical trials since the 40s, experiments, university, where someone has developed an addictive disorder when it was done, in a clinical environment with your therapy, with your support, etc. For example, now I'm trying, because I'm mindful of the time, I'm trying to get my research to do a pilot study in the Netherlands where we want to treat a batch of people affected by gambling disorder, in a center that they normally deal with PTSD, anxiety, and depression. Once we, what we want to do, run a battery of tests, check that the person were, in different situations, in terms of anxiety, depression, gambling, proceed with the therapy. The therapy, normally what you do is some sessions of preparation and focus. Okay, what do you want to work with? What are your problems? Then the psychedelic session that normally are 1 or 2. When we talk about other medication like antidepressants, it's ongoing. And we're talking about 1 or 2 sessions that may be like 4 to 6 hour tripping. It's not much of a big deal. And we all trip every night when we're sleeping. And the last bit is integration. When you deal with your inner demons, you may have an emotional breakthrough, and then you talk with the therapist about how do you integrate those changes in your life. So it's something that if anyone is interested on support this research project, please come and talk to me, because, we can really change the way that therapy is provided. Paul was talking that, the best treatment that they have right now is 14 weeks. That's a lot of time. Not many people can go for 14 weeks to a residential project. So imagine if we can deliver a treatment that can be even much more effective with therapy, and then a few days, maybe 1 week in one retreat, and then a bit more therapy. You all have the opportunity, to make the treatment into something that can be much more effective. And the effectiveness have been shown for other disorders in a lot of scientific papers. So it's a no-brainer.
Our women's program's 5 weeks, by the way, not 14 weeks. It's only the men we lock up for 14 weeks.
Any other questions out there?
you're talking about mainly addicted people, but would you say how many percentage of the gamblers are standing on financial harm? So not addicted yet, but they are for any harm.
Okay, that's a good question because, for example, we can separate what's gambling disorder or gambling addiction between gambling-related harm. You can drink, for example, at a harmful level. A great proportion of people, they drink at a level that is causing them harm, but you're not considered an alcoholic. So I probably say that the percentage is much higher.
Would you say it can end up with addiction? Sorry.
So just quickly then, so the PGSI is kind of the general score. PGSI score of 8 is considered a problem gambler. At Gordon Moody, we take them at 23. So, and we get them down to 3 within the treatment phase. So, and that was put out this morning on the data. So 70% adherence rate, and we go from 23 to 3 within our treatment phase. And the normal problem gambling rate is considered 8. So that shows you the complexity level that we deal with. So you're probably talking about financial harm. They'll probably score only 8 or 9, not even that, probably. So if someone calls us and say, I've scored 4 or 5 on the PGSI, it's like, well, that's why it takes 12 years to come to us, because that's the level that we're dealing with.
So you would say, basically, if I understood you well, a harmful gambler can end up without addiction?
Yeah, because with the term problem gambler is a misleading term. We deal with pathological gamblers is a better term. It's actually the clinical term. Problem gamblers, yeah, it's probably about 4, 5, 6 on PGSI. A problem gambler is someone who experiences financial issues and may come in and out and may have a problem 1 week and then be fine, and then later on may have financial issues again, whereas a pathological gambler will probably be comorbid and have other issues as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes. And just one more question, if you don't mind.
You've got 15 seconds.
Do you see any positive effect from regulators on this side of gambling?
I think the regulators can have a huge positive effect, yes. They all talk to each other. I'm not sure about the UK regulators at the moment, but yeah, positive. I think AI across the board, yeah, I think it can be a positive thing. Yeah, but regulators talking to each other, being consistent across the board, I think, and I think operators would probably appreciate a consistent approach. But I'm a treatment provider and not an operator, so.
Excellent. Thank you very much to Paul and Pedro. It was excellent. Hope you enjoyed it. Had a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.